Hello people, Scotty. So having just recorded video the other day about Social Democrat 01, the most important point I was addressing was about what defines socialism basically, and showing that it isn't as black and white as just showing privatisation being connected to capitalism and full stop, that's it. As if they say nationalisation is connected to socialism, full stop, and it's like this black and white picture where you have capitalism, socialism, that's just it. There's like no in between of nothing, and it's just like taking fascism and then throwing it in the side of capitalism. Oh, it's not socialism's fault, and it's all the rest of this nonsense. And that is the point that I was basically addressing. I have of course pointed this out before, and I will point it out again. Here is a quotation by Tom Woods, who quotes about what fascism basically is.
A lot of times libertarians and supporters of the free market are called fascists, right? It's a stupid, inane remark to make. How could we possibly be fascists when fascism was developed specifically as an alternative to laissez-faire capitalism? That was expressly the goal of the thing.
And so Social Democrat 01 has made an immediate video response because he's obsessed over the issue to do with Nazi Germany, his religious hatred of capitalism, and his religious support of socialism. Now what's laughable is the very fact that, of course, he first shows a clip of me here. One of the problems with Social Democrat 01 is the fact that you're never going to get anywhere with him. It's pointless debating someone like that. And then he responds with this.
Hilarious. That is exactly what two prominent YouTubers said about him.
Scotty M is an extremely vulgar right-wing libertarian on YouTube. Those of you who remember my exchange with him back when I was a liberal will understand that this person is so immune and impervious to facts, reason and thinking.
Scotty, you don't know what you're talking about. The fact that you can now reduce this to attacks on me personally says everything. You don't know what you're talking about.
Those were honestly the two best examples you could come up with. You come up with Libertarian Socialist Rants. His name itself is laughable. The idea that you can have libertarian socialism. Hi everybody, I'm a libertarian, but guess what? I want to prevent you from owning your own private business and your own private land. Do you not see how laughable that is to point out Libertarian Socialist Rants? I made a video response to him. So those of you may remember me doing a video a while back, and it was called UKIP Myths Debunked, and I done it on this boy called Camille Bams. In case you actually missed that, it seems to go over your head, and he hasn't even made a video response. In fact, I made an absolute arse out of him. Let's say I write a book called The Theories of How Pigs Can Fly. What's the problem? The problem is that the real world defies me. The problem is the very fact that I cannot ignore the laws of gravity. That's the problem. And this is the problem with what we call idealist socialists. Idealist socialists live in a dream world. They ignore praxeology. And here's an example. Look around you to all of the people who are demanding higher paid wages. There's even a lot of socialists out there today who are demanding higher paid wages. And what's the problem with that? Well, this contradicts his libertarian socialism in the real world, because his libertarian socialism is aiming for a moneyless society that's classless. And the very problem with that is the very fact that people don't want to work for free. People want to work for a wage. That's the problem. I made an arse out of him targeting basically what he supports. And you could call me arrogant all you want. Call me arrogant. Call me whatever you wish. I remember over a year ago, I argued with him on UKIP, and I made a video called UKIP Myths Debunked. Unfortunately, I don't have that video now, but the main argument that I put forward to him was on corporatism. Now, of course, he has a recent video on corporatism, and somehow he's connecting this to calling it Capitalism 2.0 and all the rest of this nonsense. The most important point of the issue is that the video that I made on UKIP Myths Debunked, I completely obliterated him on that entire argument. Okay? Now, his main argument was the fact that at that point in time was about if we didn't have regulations, all hell would break loose, and oh, how evil capitalism would lead to exploitation.
And that's exactly why there are regulations in place in order to prevent corporations from forming monopolies. This idea of a totally free market with no regulations whatsoever is completely fictional, and I'm glad that's the case.
It's laughable. He's now supporting something that's moneyless. If that's not exploitation, what the bloody hell is? And then, of course, at that point in time, he was saying about, oh, if we don't have these government regulations, oh, wherever would we be? Well, I've just established the very fact that government regulations is in reference to socialism. The government regulations is in reference to socialism. That's been the age-old argument. That's always been the argument. That's why the socialists sat and blamed Thatcher for this, that and the next thing. They said, oh, Thatcher deregulated the economy and all hell broke loose, and oh, how evil capitalism was. The deregulation, caused the banking crisis, which of course is just a lot of nonsense considering the fact that FSA overregulated the banks. Their own handbook was more than 10,500 pages long going into 2008, but that's another story. But the most important point of the issue is, this is the boy that you turned to, and you thought that he debunked me. You actually thought he put me in my place. If he put me in my place, how could he not make a video response to me after the video I made in response to him? This is the video here. This is the video that I made in response to him. And I can even link you to the video. I can even post in the video description area of this video. I can even point to you the most important argument and most important point is the fact that to prove just how illiterate this boy is, to prove that he has no clue of what he's talking about. This is the same boy who tried to differentiate the word nationalisation to collectivisation. He didn't understand anything at all to do with the definitions. He tried to connect the word nationalisation to that of, state socialism, and then he tried to take collectivisation and change it for his own agenda to suit what was his libertarian socialism. In that video, I pointed out definitions. So here's the clip where I completely tore the backside out of him.
Oh look, someone on YouTube trying to reconcile the fact that their arguments are shit by appealing to the dictionary. Definitely didn't see that one coming. Not necessarily. There is a meaningful distinction to be made between nationalisation and collectivisation. If an industry is nationalised, then it's controlled by the state. If an industry is collectivised, that means that it's directly managed by the workers in that industry. The word socialism has been used to describe both of these things, and you've simply ignored this completely.
Collectivism. The principles or system of ownership and control of the means of production and distribution by the people collectively, usually under the supervision of government. That's collectivism. To prove he doesn't even understand what he's talking about. I mean, after all, what does it mean by socialised medicine? What does it mean by, when someone speaks about socialised healthcare or socialised education? What does it mean by socialised? Well, it's another word for collectivised, isn't it? Of course it is. Because the word collectivism is synonymous to the word socialism. There's no arguing with that fact. It's a simple fact. That's what it means by collectivism. Collectivism is just the same thing as socialism, really. The word when we speak about a synonym of something, It means that something means exactly or nearly the same as another word or phrase. But of course, it's not just as simple as looking at the synonym. We have to also look at socialism, its definition, collectivism, its definition, look at both definitions, look at recorded history, and you can see they both are exactly the same. So when we speak about collectivism, when we speak about collectivising the economy, that is socialising the economy. That is socialism. What do you think you're doing when you're nationalising something? If you're taking it out of private hands and you're nationalising it, you're collectivising it. The fact that you're not even intelligent enough to even understand something that simple proves that, you don't even understand the English language. But, of course, that comes of no surprise. I mean, this is a boy who doesn't even understand the very definition of the word prevent. If you support socialism, your goal is to eradicate all means of private ownership. Yes, 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 yes. Yes, yes. That's exactly what the goal is of socialism. To eradicate all means of private ownership. But you see, this is what you're about to do. You're about to shoot yourself in the foot. You're about to take the gun, shoot yourself in the foot after I just spoke about the difference between theory and practice. This is what you're about to do. Because you're sitting there behind the screen right now and you're saying to yourself, you've just contradicted yourself, Scotty. No, I haven't. I haven't. And here's the reason why. I'm telling you that socialism, its goal is to eradicate private ownership. Do you understand the difference between the goal of something to that of what is put into practice? You don't, do you? You really don't. You're not intelligent enough to understand. You don't understand, do you? Just because you have a goal of something doesn't mean to say that it's going to turn out the same when you put it into practice. Okay? So the goal of socialism is to eradicate private ownership. We know that. The only way you can take private ownership out of the hands of, private hands and collectivise it, nationalise it, call it whatever you want to wish, socialise it, it's the same thing. The only way you can do that is by the use of force. In other words, government coercion, right? That's the most important point. The most important point is that you have to use force in order to do so. So, once you've got rid of private ownership, once you've basically got rid of private ownership, theoretically, theoretically, this is the beautiful bit. This is why people like you are not intelligent enough to understand the difference between theory and practice. Theoretically, in your dream world, getting rid of private ownership. Okay? That's what the end goal of socialism, the goal of socialism, okay? Goal. Doesn't mean to say it turns out that way in practice. But the point of the issue is, this is the goal of socialism, this is the theory of socialism, getting rid of private ownership. Let's theoretically speak about that. Let's just imagine for a second you got rid of private ownership. And you then got rid of the government. Yeah? Then you get rid of the government. Who then is going to stop people like me and other people like me from owning my own private business? Who then is going to force the issue? Who then is going to stop me as an individual, or other people like me as an individual, owning my own private business? You don't know, do you? You don't know. You see, that's the point. Number one, it's a contradiction to liberty. Because you're taking away an individual's right and an individual's liberty to owning their own business. Of course that's anti-libertarian. How can it be libertarian to prevent an individual from owning their own business? If I don't want to work with other people, if I want to own my own business, I mean, there's a lot of people out there, a lot of people who want to start up their own business because they want to be independent from other people. Okay? That's reality. That's what you call the real world, son. Okay? The real world. Not the fucking fantasy world that you live in. Okay? That's the real world. It's called praxeology and how human nature reacts to, certain situations. For example, human nature, we all want higher paid wages, but you live in a fantasy world where people think they can, where these socialists think people will just work for free, work for nothing, work for a moneyless based economy, and everybody will be happy ever after, and rainbows and fucking gold falling out the sky. And this is the point between theory and practice. It's all well speaking about a goal. It's all well saying, well, the goal of socialism is all this, getting rid of private ownership. My main argument there is the fact that you can't get rid of private ownership without the use of force. And when you've got rid of the use of, private ownership, how then are you going to keep it out of sight? Son? How are you going to do that, son? You don't know, do you? You don't know. You don't know how you're going to keep it out of sight, do you? You don't have a clue. Yeah. It's all well speaking about, yeah, we'll finally get rid of private ownership. Yeah. And now we're going to get rid of the government, and who then is going to stop it? Are you going to stop me as an individual starting up my own private business? And even if that was the case, if you're seeking to prevent, that's if you actually understand the English language, son. You see, this is the lack of intelligence of people such as yourself, Social Democrat 01. You don't even understand the English language. The word prevent is the very antithesis of the whole word liberty. If you're wanting to prevent me from owning my own private business, what the hell? How the hell can you connect that to the word of liberty? Hi everybody, I want to prevent you from owning your own private business freely, but guess what? I'm a libertarian. Are you out of your bloody mind? Are you insane? Did you even learn the English language at school? This is the reason why you cannot take your type seriously. Because I completely flattened libertarian socialist rants. I did. Here's libertarian socialist rants on the words nationalisation and, of course, collectivisation. And first of all, let's show a little clip of him speaking about the dictionary. How, it's not important to look at the dictionary. This is a new trend that's come up. A new trend with lefties where if you dare speak about the dictionary, the dictionary, it's a dictionary fallacy now, isn't it? Everything's a dictionary fallacy, because I'll tell you why it's a dictionary fallacy to people such as yourself and Libertarian Socialist Rants and Jason Unruhe. It's a dictionary fallacy because the dictionary contradicts you. But here we go. After he says this.
Oh look, someone on YouTube trying to reconcile the fact that their arguments are shit by appealing to the dictionary. Definitely didn't see that one coming.
What did Libertarian Socialist Rants do? He then contradicted himself by then going on about the definitions of nationalisation and collectivisation, and trying to show some sort of difference. Trying to show as if there's some sort of difference, that nationalisation is only in reference to state ownership and collectivisation is apparently for the group, didn't he?
Not necessarily. There is a meaningful distinction to be made between nationalisation and collectivisation. If an industry is nationalised, then it's controlled by the state. If an industry is collectivised, that means that it's directly managed by the workers in that industry. The word socialism has been used to describe both of these things, and you've simply ignored this completely.
Yes, that's what you call a contradiction, son. You see, you like what I did there. I made an arse out of him. In this video here. That's the special bit, son. That's the cherry on top of the fucking cake. Okay? I've just made a complete arse out of him. I made a fool out of him in the video response,
A common question asked is, how does socialism make things cheaper?
How is this a common question? A common question asked, how does socialism make things cheaper? The simple answer is, it doesn't. With a basic understanding of supply and demand, and of course prices in the market, we can understand the reason why socialism doesn't make things cheaper. In fact, it has the opposite effect. One only needs to look at Chile in the early 1970s, of course with its price and wage controls that caused hyperinflation by 1973, thanks to Allende.
In 1970, with the support of Cuba's Fidel Castro, Chile elects the first communist president in the Western world. Salvador Allende immediately nationalizes basic industries and controls prices and wages. The Chicago boys remain quietly in the background. One of them is Rolf Luders, who earned his PhD with Milton.
Under Allende, the rate of increase in prices annualized of the month of September 73 was 1,000%. 1,000%.
Jason Unruhe, of course, was writing his own books and having them published and selling the books.
Maelstrom News fans, I would like to announce a brand new book that I have on sale right now called Utopian Capitalism.
It's capitalism that goes into producing these. It's the capital that produces them. So, writing your own books, having them published and then selling them is laughable. He clearly doesn't understand capitalism. So, your argument with this libertarian socialist Rants, who I already walked all over, and of course Jason Unruhe, what was the point? What exactly was the point?
It's not true private ownership? Newsflash. Every single nation in the world regulates private property, because they could not exist without regulation.
Didn't I just already point out the very fact that nothing is ever fixated? We know from history that things haven't been 100% on either side. You can't say you've had a truly 100% socialist type of economy. And you can't say there's ever been 100% capitalism. We know that. We know even from the Industrial Revolution that there's been periods where government has interfered. But what I have said is that although there isn't something of a purely free market, as something like purely meaning 100%, what we can say is when we refer to the term free market, we tend to speak about something on a scale as how free the market economy is. When we talk about the Industrial Revolution, it just so happened to be a period in history where there was levels where there was government interference more so than other periods. A perfect example of that would be the American Industrial Revolution, where you had a period of strong private ownership of the turnpike industry, and then in other parts you had, the internal improvements. Now we can see the contrasting difference between the private ownership, where it was left be, where it was very successful under the free market, to that of when government interfered with all its internal improvements. We've got the evidence of that from the likes of Abraham Lincoln, who began all of his internal improvements. Roads were left unfinished. Bankruptcy had occurred. The debt levels had soared through the roof. Yet if you were to compare that to, the turnpike industry between 1794 to, of course, 1840, you will see a colossal difference on how private road building gave government a showing up with its internal improvements. This is an example in history of what I'm talking about, where we speak about, things are like a scale. So your argument there is completely void of what I'm talking about. Your argument is fallacious, because you're talking about today. In this world today, most countries are not capitalist. Most countries today are either corporatist or they're socialist, and very few countries have at least somewhat of a free market. And Hong Kong isn't exactly a perfect example to use today. Why? Because there's a big difference between Hong Kong from what it was between 1961 to 1997 to that of what Hong Kong became when, of course, China had taken back occupancy of Hong Kong. So, there's a colossal difference there. But what you completely ignore is the fact that government's regulation is socialism. And no, in any economy that you see where there's strong government regulation, that is not capitalism. You don't have capitalism in Great Britain today as a system. You don't have it today in the United States of America as a system, because they're over-regulated. So this is what we're talking about. You don't understand the difference between capitalism to that of corporatism. You don't. And the fact that you religiously attempt to conflate them together is laughable. You're the same type of person who would completely ignore the fact that you were the type of, person who would come out and blame Margaret Thatcher for all the deregulation of the economy and all the rest of this nonsense. But on the other hand of things, you're the same type of people who would say, oh, if it wasn't for all the government regulations, oh, where would we be with the environment and all the rest of this complete and utter dross? You see, you're contradictory. You don't know what you're talking about. You don't understand the difference between true private ownership, where there's low levels of government regulation, and it's strongly the market that self-regulates, to that of what we call an economy on a scale where we see government mostly strongly regulating private business. That is socialism. If you're a business owner, how are you the one controlling your business when you're being dictated to by the government in just about every field? You're being dictated to how many people you can employ. You're being dictated to over your prices. You're being dictated to over how much you can pay your workers, how many hours they work. You're being dictated to over the production, over how much gets produced, what gets produced. That's not true private ownership. The difference between that, which is corporatism, to that of capitalism, where we saw during, for example, the free market years in the United States of America, the difference is, back in that period in history, private business owners were the ones who were determining the prices. And we saw the free market years of Hong Kong between 1961 to 1997, where the British government were very, limited in what they could do with Hong Kong. In other words, Hong Kong was strongly free. And let's face the facts here. Let's look at, for example, Hong Kong in that period where they had extremely low levels of government regulation. Their economy was strongly free. And businesses, the exchange between businesses was free. Prices were set by the market, not by government. So this nonsense you're hitting out with is just complete and utter dross. And you see, I never said anything at all about, there being no regulation. I never stated that anywhere. I said the market self-regulates. That's what capitalism's about. I never said capitalism was about no, regulations at all. I said the market self-regulates. For example, consumers are the ones that determine quality for themselves. That's what you call the market that self-regulates. The market is regulating itself over prices, over people's wages, over, various other things, such as quality and quantity and various other, regulations. The market self-regulates. I never said there was no regulation. But I said that capitalism, that's what capitalism is about the market that self-regulates. There's a strong difference between that and government regulation. Government regulation is socialism. The fact that you're trying to deny this just says it all. What's been the age-old argument, as I said? The age-old argument has always been socialists arguing for government regulation to protect them from such and such. That's always been the argument. Always. Whereas capitalists have always argued for deregulation from government. They believe in the market self-regulating. And this is exactly what we mean. You don't understand what you're talking about.
Actually, corporatism is a form of capitalism.
And no, you can't, Social Democrat 01, because you can't name one single example of a monopoly that ever existed under a capitalist system. This is why you have to laugh at you. I mean, you're going on about how capitalism is basically a type of corporatism. No, it's not. No, it's not. Because capitalism, for a fact, is an individualist ideology. It falls under individualism.
If we had individualism in America today, as we used to, we don't have it anymore, but if we had it today, we would not have this banking crisis, because the banks are getting away literally with legalized plunder because they're in bed with the politicians and they're using the state in order to plunder the people legally. If people understood that, they wouldn't go into the streets and say, get rid of capitalism. What they'd be saying is, let's get rid of socialism, let's get rid of communism, let's get rid of fascism, let's get rid of collectivism. That's the real word that covers all of that, and let's go back to individualism.
Individualism is the opposite of collectivism. You never have liked that fact. And I'll tell you the reason why you don't like that fact. You despise that fact because collectivism is another word for socialism.
Those bankers are not capitalists. Most of those bankers, I guess the best word you would say for them is they're collectivists, which is another word of saying socialists.
That's right, collectivism, collectivism, collectivise, socialise. They both mean the same thing. They're synonymous. We've even got the evidence here. The synonym of basically collectivism is socialism. When you socialise something, you're collectivising it. The word collectivism, even by definition, is the exact same thing as socialism. What's the definition of the synonym? Let's look at the definition. Here's the definition here. The definition basically means it's a word that means exactly or nearly the same as another word, such as shut is a synonym of close. So, socialism itself is synonymous to the word collectivism, even by definition, even proven by recorded history. That's why when we talk about the Soviet Union and every other, socialist movement, every other socialist movement we've ever seen have all been collectivist. And why? Because that's what a collectivist movement is. A collectivist movement is socialist. That's what Nazi Germany was, and you religiously hate that fact. You don't like this simply because the fact it contradicts everything that you believe in. You don't like it because it proves what basically collectivism is by, definition. You look at both the definition of socialism and the definition of collectivism and you can see that evidence. But most importantly, as I've pointed out, the word capitalism is an individualist ideology. It falls under individualism. You cannot take capitalism, the opposite of collectivism, and shove capitalism under collectivism. You just cannot. You can't do it because it's another word for socialism. How can you take capitalism and shove it under the same meaning as basically what socialism is? How can you? They're opposite to each other. Most importantly, what you are ignorant of is the very fact that when it comes down to recorded history, you cannot name one single example of a monopoly that ever existed under a capitalist system. If you're going to sit and name Monsanto or other examples such as Microsoft, you're shooting yourself in the foot. You're using examples today under corporatism. You can't name examples of monopolies that ever formed under a capitalist system. Corporatism's not the same thing as capitalism. No, it's not. Capitalism is not a merger between state and corporations. You can't name one single example. You can't name Standard Oil. It never held a monopoly. Yes, they gained 90% share of the market. But what happened between 1879 to 1897? They were forced to continue on driving down their costs because of the threat of competition stepping in and underbidding them. That's the whole reason why the price of a barrel of oil kept on dropping in price. From 1869, one barrel of oil was worth 30 cents per barrel. By 1897, it was only worth 5.9 cents per barrel of oil. In 1879, 9 years after they gained 4% share of the market, they gained 90% share of the market in 1879, and even when they gained 90% share of the market, they were forced to continue on driving down their cost of a barrel of oil. That's why from 1869, 30 cents per barrel of oil, right up to 1897, it only cost 5.9 cents per barrel of oil, which benefited the whole of society. They never held a monopoly because the threat of competition was always there to step in and underbid them. Standard Oil only became such a monopoly when that company was broken up. That's when the monopoly had begun. And when it came to the whole thing, it's like I say, on the De Beers Group, the De Beers Group didn't gain a monopoly or a near perfect monopoly until, of course, the nationalisation by government. So, this is exactly what we mean. You can't name a single example of where a monopoly has ever occurred under a capitalist system, but there you are. You're willing to sit there, despite the fact you can't name one, you're willing to sit there and say that capitalism's a form of corporatism. If it's a form of corporatism, how come you can't even name one single example of a monopoly that ever existed under a capitalist system? You can't do it, can you? I'm challenging you right now to show to people an example of, a monopoly. And I bet you anything, any example you fling at my face, every example that you fling at me will be an example of corporatism stemming from states' intervention. Because from the lack of government intervention, there's never been monopolies that have existed under a free market system. So there you have it. You're talking nonsense. Capitalism is not the early stages of, nor is it corporatism itself. Corporatism is a collectivist ideology. Even the man himself, Alexander Hamilton, a socialist banker who founded the First National Bank, was an enemy to the free market capitalist Thomas Jefferson. And what was it that was most important about this? The capitalist class for years opposed the protectionist tariffs. The capitalist class themselves were the people who opposed all of the internal improvements. In other words, it was the capitalist class who were opposing the corporatism. You see, maybe the likes of Ethan and Lewis, who might not have the knowledge in order to fire back at you, to slap you across the face, but when you stand up against someone who actually does understand the history, you won't stand a chance. Because in that period in history, in American history, we know that the American Revolutionary War was a capitalist revolution, and we know for a fact that the very people who were supporting the corporatist internal improvements were the very socialist class who you try to defend. It was the capitalist class who opposed it. The capitalists who were the ones who were fighting to end the central bank. It was the capitalist class who ended the sugar tax. It was the capitalist class who ended the likes of the Stamp Act and the Townshend Act and the Tea Act. After all, who do you think formed the Boston Tea Party? The Boston Tea Party was formed by the merchant capitalist class. The capitalist class opposed the likes of the protectionist tariffs, mostly. And of course, as well as the internal improvements. The very people who were supporting the internal improvements was largely the socialist class. That's who supported it. And you want to know what's most important? What's most important is the very fact that the socialists viewed corporatism as an improvement to that of capitalism. That's what they viewed it as. They viewed it as an improvement. So they basically favoured it. And that's the very reason why you look at a company such as Uber. Uber's a taxi company, and one that's scalping the backside off of the current, monopoly over taxi service that you have today. And what did the socialists cry out for? The socialists cried out to regulate Uber as a taxi service simply because it's too efficient. And you've got to laugh at that, because Uber is a service that's providing cheaper costs. Cheaper taxi service that's more efficient. And yet, you have to question that. Why are socialists crying out to basically regulate something such as that? You see, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You're talking mince. You don't even understand recorded history. I remember facing off against you when it came to the turnpike industry. And you hit out with one big load of nonsense. We've got American history to prove that the very people who supported the internal improvements and all the corporatism were the socialists. That's who Alexander Hamilton was. Alexander Hamilton, the founder of course, not just the newspaper that he used against to propagate hatred of Thomas Jefferson, but was the very man who founded the First National Bank, who supported the protectionist tariffs, the high taxation on the poor to subsidise the rich. He was the founder of cronyism in the United States. He was a socialist. He was the founder of the First National Bank. That's why you've got to laugh at you. Thomas Jefferson was his main enemy, his arch rival. Thomas Jefferson, the classical liberal capitalist, opposed the First National Bank. So there you have it. You don't even know what you're talking about. You don't know anything. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. Recorded history is contradicting what you just claimed there. Oh, and by the way, just being an economist doesn't make you credible by any means. We've got the likes of Paul Krugman, who's a Nobel Prize winner of economics, who was given a showing up by a Spanish economist of the Austrian School of Economics. It's laughable, to say the least, that they call it organised capitalism, just because the fact it's private ownership. But what you ignore is the fact that state direction of the economy, state direction, state regulation, state control over the means of private industry is socialism. I've pointed that out in the definition. Now, like I had pointed out earlier, and this is the laughable part, this is the bit we get to laugh at. Like I had said, although the goal of socialism is to eradicate all means of private ownership, it doesn't mean to say it turns out that way in practice. And this is exactly it. Socialism can't get rid of the private sector. Why? Because it's the private sector that, entirely funds the economy. It's the private sector that funds the entire economy. Therefore, it can't get rid of the private sector. So instead, what the state does is it regulates the private industry and directs it. State direction of private industry is socialism.
Socialism means, among other things, using political agencies to provide goods and services that otherwise would be provided privately in the marketplace. In its most extreme form, socialism means government direction of the economy as a whole. Socialism, in its milder expressions, takes the form of nationalized industries, the Chilean copper mining industry under Allende, Pakistan's petrochemical sector, and heavy industries under Bhutto. Government ownership or direction of firms, Alfa Romeo under Mussolini, the Japan National Railway, direct government provision of goods and services, the British Health Service, or government management of nominally private marketplace activities, farm subsidies in France, Fannie Mae in the United States.
And that's exactly what I'm saying. You hate that fact. You religiously despise it.